Richard Neff does join us on the line here on Indiana in the Morning. Our conversation is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. Dr. Neff, good morning.
Good morning, Todd. How are you today?
Wonderful, and it's good to have you on the air with us today. I'm glad that you're able to spend a little bit of time with us because it's a pretty important topic, and we need some clarity on this. We need you to clear it up, if you will, because last week the skies were not clear around our area, and we get these days when they're called orange alert days or action days, where they say that it's kind of dangerous for folks who are vulnerable to breathe the outside air or to exert themselves too much. And so we wanted to get a medical perspective on that, and who else to talk to but somebody from IRMC, and you're the CMO there, so you should know.
Well, thank you. Yes, and it is concerning and worrisome when we have those days of whatever reason, whether it's fires, smoke from fires in Canada, or industrial smoke that sort of hangs around in regions. When we have those orange days or yellow days, especially concerning for people with chronic asthma or COPD, emphysema, elderly people with poor hearts, poor sick hearts, or other chronic conditions that can certainly set people off. And sometimes I would imagine that people might not recognize that as one of their triggers for their asthma or their COPD. I'm hearing people walking around the hospital with a little bit of a mild cough even today that is probably they got set off and they are having trouble breathing just walking around. Well, even after a couple of days of much clearer weather.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about it is there's a little bit of masking going on because we might find ourselves having difficulty breathing on a given day and say, oh, it's allergies today, or it's something else, when it actually could be the actual air that you're breathing in.
Well, and allergies are certainly one of those things that can trigger people into an exacerbation of their COPD or their asthma. But you're right. The small, fine particles that are sometimes in the air can make it harder for people to breathe.
We were watching the skies last week, and the sun was shining, and it was casting shadows, but they weren't the bright, sharp shadows that we're used to when the sun is shining. And we were told that it was the Canadian wildfires, and that seems to be very upper atmosphere, but it somehow makes its way down to the air that we're breathing down here too, doesn't it?
It certainly does. I was talking with one of the helicopter pilots here that transport people in and out of the hospital here, and they were saying during that time that they would go up to 1,500 feet, and they had a real hard time seeing. So they had a much reduced visibility, just a little bit higher than we are here on the ground. So it does affect us here, and even when it's mostly a little bit higher up, 1,000 or so feet up in the air.
So we hear about breathing difficulties when we are exerting ourselves or when we are at risk or vulnerable. Older people, smokers, you mentioned COPD, younger people with developing lungs too. They would be affected as well, right?
Exactly, and we have a number of kids with that asthma that kids sometimes get for the first couple of years of life that they often seem to largely outgrow as they get into adulthood. That can certainly affect their breathing.
When we were growing up, we were talking about secondhand smoke from parents who smoked or people who smoked around us, and we were breathing in that smoke. And we were wondering, are we doing damage to our lungs by breathing that air in, and is that damage reversible? I think the same question would apply today. Are we damaging ourselves long term, and is that damage reversible?
I think as most of us know, we have an amazing ability to be resilient with our lungs and our health. So the lungs do heal, but it is that chronic, constant exposure to either secondhand smoke or heavy industrial, pollutants, either whether it's coal mining dust or whether it's from the, or iron ore fields or smeltering plants or things like that, those can certainly cause some chronic lung disease.
Yeah, and certainly we breathe in fumes from chemicals that we are working around sometimes too when we're on the job. I think of those guys that are in the roofing industry and and others who are working in jobs that would put them at risk of certain things like that. So
exactly.
Let's talk about things that we can do to alleviate some of those problems. Masking, is that something that people should be able to do?
For times where they're certainly in workplaces where there are recommendations to go ahead and use masking or other kinds of air filtration devices, those are highly helpful to go ahead and help reduce the chance of long-term lung disease, and making sure that you're doing whatever you can to quit smoking. Those things are all additive. So you have a little bit of chronic asthma, you have a little bit of smoking, and you work in an environment where you have exposure to pollutants or smoke or dust in a particular high level, and it can all be very additive. And so doing what you can to go ahead and reduce your exposure and reduce using the PPE that is available at work is important.
We only have Dr. Richard Neff with us for a few more moments. I wanted to talk about not people who are considered to be at risk or who we might traditionally think are at risk, but those who are generally healthy and particularly the workout guys and gals that we see are jogging along our streets every morning here on Indiana in the Morning. People who really work out and exert themselves outdoors. We think about protecting ourselves from the sunshine and getting too much sun exposure, but are their lungs, when they're breathing in and working out so hard, are their lungs at risk as well?
When in those times when we have heavy levels of pollutants or smoke in the air, yes, they're taking in extra deep breaths and bringing in those extra doses of pollutant to their lungs. And so it is reasonable in those times where the smoke is pretty heavy or the pollutants are pretty heavy to go ahead and maybe do some other things, do some indoor exercises, do some work that's not going to expose you that way. And there's ways you can figure it out. There's a very good website that has an app, the airnow.gov has maps that is able to go ahead and tell you not just what the particulates are like in the air now, but to go ahead and forecast it for later today and even into tomorrow to be able to sort of help predict what the air is going to be like in the next day or so.
airnow.gov. Meanwhile, Dr. Neff, I'm sure that it's not a bad idea to check it out with your doctor, and you should be seeing that PCP anyway, right?
Yes. And I think especially if you have some if you have emphysema or chronic asthma or heart failure, you're having a plan for what happens when you get a little bit, out of sorts, when you start noticing that you're coughing more or that you're having an exacerbation, to make sure that you have an action plan, which, can sometimes be just increasing your rescue inhaler and sometimes can be, increasing the use of an inhaled steroid if that's what you have. Those things are good things to discuss with your doctor so you have a plan so you don't necessarily have to be, symptomatic for a period of time or even have to come in and be seen in the urgent care or walk in or even in the emergency department.
So we should take those warnings when they're issued very seriously, and we should also be checking up on our health generally with our PCP. Dr. Richard Neff, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Todd. Have a great day.
You too. It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. WCCSradio.com.